also looking at how do social inequalities create barriers to decarbonization, and how do some of those inequalities might be surprising. So for instance, we're looking at the intense resistance in rural spaces to the development and the construction of clean energy, and looking in particular at New York. This is like a big environmental justice problem. You can't close down gas plants in communities of color in the cities if you can't build new solar and wind and other energy infrastructure in rural places. And that involves a sort of political analysis. How do you end up with this kind of like congealed urban-rural split that is causing so much anger, so much rage out in those kinds of places? I mean, I don't think behavioral science doesn't necessarily help us with every question, like how do you decarbonize steel? That gets quite technical. But a lot of this is going to come down to living in different ways. And I think some of that is infrastructural, right? We want to produce and reform housing so that it doesn't take a massive like intellectual load to use less energy, right? There are tools that can make it very simple so that the dishwasher runs when the sun is shining. We can talk a little bit more in details like that. Public transit, of course, people shouldn't have to be making a massive effort to take public transit. It should be easy. But there are other areas where where maybe I would disagree with some of my friends on the left, where I think the cultural dimension and the kind of, in some ways, even the spiritual dimension is really essential. If we think about issues like food or how we undertake leisure, I don't think there's a world where either companies or the government can just come in and say, you have a new diet tomorrow. People are not going to accept that, or say, oh, the way you spend your free time, actually, we don't do that anymore. The road trip's out, it's canceled. I don't think that's going to work. And so I think there we are going to need different partners in society to work bottom up to make it the ultimate switch that is necessary to be desirable. Cities are also a site of major social conflict. I think right now, I would say that that's really driven by housing. Hot land markets, what that actually means in urban politics is that if any government comes in and says, I want to do a green investment to improve this neighborhood, this low-income neighborhood that needs it, a lot of people in those neighborhoods are going to say, you cannot do anything that will increase land values and could cause me to get displaced by rising rents. So this is like a big knot we're going to have to figure out how to untangle. If you look throughout history, what aristocrats, the people with the most money and freedom, do is they spend time in their country estate, and they spend time in the city, going to the theater, having society, art, culture, etc. And so I think one of the big questions that we'll be facing in the years ahead is how can we ensure that people who live in cities, which will be quite dense, have plentiful, no carbon access to the wilds beyond. And I think if we can offer that form of urban good life, then we are going to come a long way towards winning many more fans to the kinds of energy efficiencies that a relatively dense city offers, which again is probably basically essential for living well on this planet in the kind of numbers that we live in today. If I live in a home and it's hot as hell out there and the utility comes in and turns down my air conditioning, what are the conditions under which I trust that versus freak out? You can go to a website called stopsmartmeters.org, and it will remind you a lot of the kinds of spaces that oppose vaccines. But it's a mix. It's a political grab bag of people who are like, what is this insane new invasive technology doing in my house? Why are people trying to control
really interesting
my energy? Yeah. So this is a big barrier to decarbonization. We have to ask, like, institutionally, what are the mechanisms of accountability where people will feel like, as increasingly is the case, algorithms making these decisions, how to adjust the load, how to balance the grid, and we could go all the way through the whole domain of sustainability, that those decisions are trusted. Fundamentally, where the climate and the social project intersect is that we need a form of prosperity that is not resource intensive. So when I sort of visualize what I love to see is looking around, seeing like temples of public luxury, having access to ecological splendor and flourishing, a sense of true freedom where I can pursue the relationships and the projects, art, science, knowledge, social connection, sport, etc., that I want. And I think ultimately to have a sense that my flourishing and my freedoms don't come at the expense of other people's, that there is some system set up so that I can truly feel that my own good living is contributing to good living for the entirety of humanity and for all the other species around us. It's a very, very big challenge, but I do think that in my quieter moments, my more introspective moments, I think we have to reverse engineer from that vision of the good life back towards our political priorities, our economic priorities, and figure out how to get there.